Welcome to the TELUS Originals DocTalks, a series of talks dedicated to craft, themes, and ideas behind TELUS Originals documentaries with the people behind and in front of the camera. I'm your host, Sabrina Rani Furminger, and for this episode, we'll be talking to Dave Rodden-Shortt about the Empress of Vancouver. The Empress of Vancouver is a cinematic and intimate collision of drag, queer history, and performance art, a musical and genre-bending irreverent documentary that follows trans icon Olive Howe as she prepares for the 40th anniversary of her coronation. The documentary is as startling and creative as the Empress herself and is interwoven with key moments from Vancouver's queer history, from the very first Gay Unity Parade in 1981 and the beginning of the AIDS crisis in 1982 and the decades before and after. The Empress of Vancouver has garnered extensive acclaim and was featured prominently in various international film festivals, including London's BFI Flair, Inside Out Film and Video Festival, and the Lunenburg Doc Fest. Telling the story of the Empress is Dave Rodden-Shortt. Dave is an award-winning documentary filmmaker with a degree in film studies from Queen's University. He has produced and directed numerous short films. In 2021, he worked as a producer and director of the award-winning short documentary series Behind the Facade for the Knowledge Network. The Empress of Vancouver, produced for TELUS Originals, is his debut documentary feature. I'm excited to speak with Dave about all of it. Dave Rodden-Shortt, welcome to TELUS Originals DocTalks.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Let's start with the Empress. Let's go right to Olive. Tell me about your first introduction to Olive. What do you recall about either the first time you saw her or the first time you met her?
Yeah, so I had seen Olive around on the street, like she's hard to miss when she's all dressed up. And I was working on that series Behind the Facade for Knowledge Network. And I was doing a bunch of research for one of the 10 films we made at Lantern Films. And the film is about Celebrities Nightclub. It's called Happy Time Social Club, and it was about an underground gay bar that was in the basement in the 1950s. Someone threw away a shoebox of the belongings of this gay man who lived in the West End, and someone else found it. And basically, I wanted to make a short film about what the photos meant and what his life might have been like, and talk about this underground bar. So during the research of that project, Kevin McEwen, who helped me out, he's like a local writer, journalist.
A legend.
He knows.
Yes.
So he pointed me in the direction of Olive Howe, and he said, if you're going to talk about the nightclub scene in Vancouver in that period of time, you have to talk to Olive. And I now understand why, because not only was she so central, she also has like this incredible memory. So I met her at a cafe, and she talked for like a couple hours or an hour and a half. And it was like, wow, there's so much here. I wrote down all these notes, and I went back to my business partner at the time, Jessica Hellenbach, and I said, this could make a feature film. Like, there's so much here. It's not just for this short film. I think we should make a feature. So that began the process of creating a pitch. We went to multiple funders before we ended up at TELUS Originals. And I'm glad we did, which we can talk about later, like what was so great about that. But yeah, and it was challenging getting funding, in spite of the fact that, like, obviously this person and this story is so remarkable.
why do you think it was so challenging to get funding? You know, considering the fact that, I mean, her story is queer history, you know, and queer present and, you know, and queer future. Like, there's so much there. Like, I would imagine, I mean, I would hope, you know, and I'm glad that TELUS Originals looked at the pitch and was like, yes. But, you know, I would hope that anyone who got their hands on it first would be like, wow, I want to be involved in telling this story. You know, what were you hearing from those initial conversations?
Yeah, I mean, it was my first kind of foray into pitching for feature. So this might be typical, or maybe it's not, I don't know. But we met with a number of, you know, the big funders out there. And actually, like, there was quite a bit of excitement, and we did get past like the first stage, and, you know, sometimes there was a follow-up or we were narrowed down. But there were a few things that I guess kept coming up. One of them was this kind of concern about it being too historical. Like, there's this kind of need for a present unfolding narrative. So I think like a nervousness around creating like a historical doc. The other one, which is one that I take issue with, is this idea that, oh, we already have a trans film in the works, or we're already funding a trans film or a drag film or whatever. And in my mind, I'm like, well, you know, is there a quota? Because like historically, there just haven't been very many films made, period. So, I mean, I think we have some catch up to do. And what's so wrong about having 2 or 3 in 1 year? I don't know. But that's just, you know, obviously I made this film, so I'm biased.
You did, and you found TELUS, and TELUS found you. TELUS Originals found you. So I am grateful to that this film happened in that way. But you know what? Even before we get to, you know, beginning production and even pitching, what kind of conversations did you need to have with Olive, to bring her story to the screen? Like, was she hard to convince?
That's a really good question. So we approached Olive, and, to her credit, she wanted to see the contract.
Mm-hmm.
She wanted full transparency, and Jessica, the producer, was really good at providing her with all the information that she would need. And we met with her, and it's really about building trust.
Mm-hmm.
And by sharing the details of the contract and being totally transparent, and also asking, like, how does she want the film to be made? She decided, okay, I can trust these people. And I think that's like especially when you're working in like marginalized communities, that issue of trust and who's representing, our histories is a really big question. So, yeah, but the condition of her involvement in the film was that we start a fund for queer documentary filmmakers, which we did. It's called the Ted North Fund. So in lieu of any actual payment, we donated some money to this fund and started this fund. And also a portion of all the revenue from the film goes towards this fund. So I think we're at around like 8,000 or something.
Wow.
And then when we get to 10, we can start to release every year like a certain amount of like 500 or whatever towards queer filmmakers.
I'm speechless. Like, that is just incredible. Like, what a real empress, to be like, if I'm going to do this, it has to benefit, the community and future storytellers. Incredible. You personally then, at the beginning of this project, like, what were your aims or your goals? What story did you want to tell? I'm going to ask a two-parted question here.
Okay.
And then how did these aims or goals, change over the course of production?
Yeah, so the original goal was to capture a period of time before the AIDS crisis. And really, like, queer history, it's not necessarily a story that a lot of people know, a lot of young people don't know the history there. So I think it was like wanting to capture this really important story that had not been told. And then, yeah, the goal did shift over time. I think like one of the big takeaways from the film was this idea of, as Olive calls it, homonormativity, where she's challenging this idea that we have to be normal, or using being normal as a way of gaining acceptance and advancing queer rights is actually a way of marginalizing people within the community. And then also, what are you really fighting for, as Olive says, if you're just wanting to be like, in a box, versus like, let's just kind of allow a much more diverse expression of being being a human. So that became, to me, like one of the most important lessons of the film, which I, is now permanently like etched into my being. And I will use that knowledge on every single project I ever work on in the future.
Yeah. It was pretty stunning to watch Olive talk about the process of stepping up to basically campaign for a year, to be crowned the Empress of Vancouver, and then to talk about the fact that she was not the usual person. Actually, maybe you could just tell our viewers and listeners, like, what exactly is, like, this was not a title, the Empress, that Olive gave herself. Like, maybe you could talk a little bit about what this competition actually was.
Yeah, so I mean, it's the competition has been going on for decades now, and it was started by Ted North in Canada. He brought it up from the States, and I think Vancouver was the first chapter outside of the States. And it's basically a drag competition, and you have an emperor and an empress that are crowned every year at this big event. In the past, like in Olive's time, there were actually people voted, so you had to campaign and you had to get the community behind you, and these were huge events, like the coronation balls every year, which would be held at the Commodore Ballroom. They were huge, like Olive describes in the film. Like, the mayor was there. Every type of person would show up to that event. It was just huge. But yeah, it still goes on today, although I think, and it's still like a great event. I think the golden age was that period. I'm not saying anything against what it's like now, but it just represented so much to the community at that time.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's also important, and the film does such a beautiful job of contextualizing, what that particular year meant. 1980, you have this just sickening footage from, a Vancouver City Council meeting, where, the gay community wanted to have a proclamation for Gay Unity Week, and you had all of these people, including the mayor. Now, not everybody, but including the mayor and some of the aldermen, just getting up and saying, like, this, the most like vile, things about why they would never, make this proclamation. And then, out of that, we see like, oh, here comes Mike Harcourt. And Mike Harcourt is, is gonna, because he was one of the people who was like, who did not say all the vile, awful stuff. And then, so that's 1980. 1981, we actually have, the election of Mike. I mean, this is all history. It's not that much of a spoiler, but I guess if you don't know the history, it's like a spoiler. But, Harcourt wins. There's not just Gay Unity Day, but Gay Unity Week. There's like proclamations made, and then, Olive is crowned and just like gorgeous, like, in the parade, the very first really parade. Now, we associate like Pride as like this, big, like, multi-million-dollar event that brings, hundreds of thousands, to Vancouver. But that was the very beginning of it. It was really about it came out of activism. And then, forward to 1982, where, I mean, you had some of the big, some of our meetings that we had here in Vancouver at that time, were some of the first conversations that were happening in public forums, about what was at one time called, the gay cancer, and the impact that it was having on the community, right? So it was incredible to watch the, how Olive's story is, tied up in, real queer history of Vancouver. I gotta say, I learned a lot, and I just like, it made me just absolutely just like gobsmacked, to see that this person has lived through all this history, and yet you were filming Olive during this other staggering time in history, which was, early days, really, or like, maybe the early-ish days of the COVID-19 pandemic. So can you tell me about, like, because I'm assuming you began work on the film, maybe pitching it or whatever, before COVID, like, how did COVID impact, how you told the story, and also how did you see COVID impacting Olive herself?
That was a great summary, by the way. Yeah, no, I mean, it was really bizarre. Like, we started filming and then COVID hit, and it shifted the film. It made the production of the film extraordinarily challenging. It would have been a different film, for better or for worse. It just would have been different. But it did provide this kind of, it was weird, talking about this one pandemic while we're in a current day pandemic.
Yeah.
And I mean, there was a question about how much we make the film about that. And I went back and forth on it, or, the whole team did. I'm kind of glad where we landed, where it's there, but it's not the focus. Because now no one wants anything to do with it. People don't want to talk about COVID.
Yeah.
But it was interesting. Yeah. There's almost like an alternate edit that's more about COVID.
Yeah.
And what's really amazing is Olive reflecting on, comparing the two pandemics, and really about the importance of empathy, and understanding, which, when it really did bring out the worst in people, the pandemic, and the best, because people, there were a lot of people who cared about each other.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so it was kind of bizarre, and also, and very challenging in terms of production.
It was just fantastic, though, to see how Olive and her friends adapted, even the accessories and and the face shield and everything was still well appointed, and all like matching and stuff. Walking around Vancouver with Olive and watching how she interacts with people, and how people interact with her, like, what did you learn about, I don't know, just the people in this city, in watching, how they, because I mean, the film shows, an array of different reactions.
Yeah, I mean, I think, especially during COVID, Olive going out on Friday nights and the crew provided people with some levity. And, I think one of the big takeaways from COVID is how social we are. Like, we need to be around other human beings. And when we're not, it's just crazy. So for Olive to go out, and that's why they would walk up and down Davie Street, and there were a period where the bars aren't even open or there's limited seating. They were providing the community with like some levity during a really difficult time. And people really loved it, appreciated it. And what's amazing too is that performance in Jim Diva Plaza, the one where she comes out of the body bag.
But I gotta say, like, I don't know what was going on in my mind, but my heart skipped a beat at that point. I'm like, what? She's fine.
Oh, good.
Oh no! And I'm like, even no.
I mean, it's a classic Olive kind of joke. Actually, when I went to Inside Out, and I was like introducing the film, I said that she had passed away, like as a joke, but it just didn't land properly. But that performance in Jim Diva Plaza, where she pretends to come out in a body bag and she's dead, that was the first permitted public performance in Vancouver at the end of the COVID restrictions.
Really?
Yeah. And I think if you watch the audience, you can see like how like people are just living for it.
Yeah.
Because they've been, holed up in their homes for months. Yeah. So it was really critical what she was doing.
Wow. So Olive, part of history once again. What were some of your favorite filming days? I'm assuming you must have had a few.
I mean, I always enjoyed going to Olive's house. And, like my preference was to go with just a camera, just like a crew of one, like me and her. So that I feel like, when you do the one-on-one with Olive, it's like the topic of conversation is a bit more personal, maybe. But I really enjoyed those, like, we did several interviews in her home. I really enjoyed that. And of course, I loved filming the drag performances. One of them was at the what's it called? The Penthouse.
But they're upstairs, like their upstairs bar that they have. Yeah. Which is a historic bar in and of itself, right?
A lot of that space is original, and we kind of wanted to, that song that she chose, which was a song from the 50s or 60s, it would have been 50s. That was an homage kind of to her elders or the people that performed when she was growing up. So we wanted to do this kind of period or like historical, it's not like, purist or anything. It's just like the aesthetic was of that time.
Yeah.
So it was a perfect venue because a lot of it's original from that time.
Yeah. Those performances were very magical to watch on film, but I'm curious about what it is actually like to watch her perform, in person. Like what special qualities does Olive bring out in these performances?
Yeah, I mean, in addition to the ones that are in the film, I've watched other performances by her, and she likes to play with the audience. And she's kind of almost like the anti-performer. Like she purposely is pushing against the expectations of what you're supposed to do as a performer. One example, which I had hoped to include in the film, but just was not possible. I wanted like a 3D section, like where you put the glasses on. Because so what she did is this is back in like 81, I think, during her campaign. She put on a show where she got all these 3D glasses for free. And she said there was a 3D performance and people bought tickets and they all showed up and they put their glasses on. And then she just started chucking like meat at them, like chicken or whatever. And because they're like, oh, they were expecting 3D. And she's like, what? It's 3D. Like, you got what you paid for. So that's kind of an Olive, like, playing with the audience and their expectations. And there's almost like an, not antagonistic, but, you know, I enjoy it. I think it's fun.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. So along the way, though, you know, while you're filming, because you talked about how, you know, at the beginning of the process, you know, you and Jessica, like, you gave the budget, you know, to Olive so she could, you know, just see what the, you know, you were very transparent about, you know, what you were doing and how you were going to do it. But what about like along the way? Like, was she a collaborator at all? Like, did you talk about or check in with her about, you know, how she felt things were going? Like, just talk to me about that process.
Yeah, I think she was explicit that she did not want to be involved in like the edit. Mm-hmm. And she didn't want to be involved because she said she knows herself that she would not be able to stop herself from trying to, you know, control maybe the film. And she had said to me, it's not the film I would make, but it's a great film. Like she's happy with it, but, you know, she allowed us the freedom. But I still feel like it was collaborative because of the process, which was really listening to her, what she wanted to include and not include. There's a lot more to her life story that's not in the film. And it was just like, did she bring it up a lot? Did she talk about it? Was it important to her? It might have made for a more like dramatic narrative to include certain things that she shared, but they didn't seem to be the things that she was like, you know, focused on, I guess. Mm-hmm. And then other things like, well, I would like to do performances and I would like these songs. Those were, you know, completely her decision. And it proved so challenging because one of them is like a Peggy Lee song. Mm-hmm. You know, it was like a top hit back in the day. It's a well-known song. It's like, okay, how are we going to secure the rights to this music? And, you know, we didn't have the budget for that really, but we just, you know, we hired a great music supervisor and we were really persistent and, yeah. So she was heavily involved, I feel, in like what you're seeing.
You know what that tells me though is also like just how explicit that she is about, you know, what she wants and doesn't want. Like that also tells me that there might have been times along the way, you know, that she might have been burned by, you know, journalists or documentarians. Like, did she talk to you about that at all? You know, because often, like, you know, you sound like you're taking a very trauma-informed approach, you know, which is very empathetic. But, you know, not everybody does. And definitely that was not the norm for, you know, the last century at least, you know, which is, I mean, that was her heyday, kind of fell during that.
Yeah, no, what you're describing in terms of a trauma-informed approach is like, I absolutely agree with that. You know, I think when you belong to, you know, a marginalized community, there are trust issues because of, you know, people have been exploited or misrepresented. There's also kind of these like narratives that just get told over and over again around trans people, you know, like, which we very like explicitly we're not going to do. Like, you know, like one narrative is like the transition, like what was the procedure like, or even like Olive will talk about it. People will say, well, what's down there? Like, basically, they want to know like what's between their legs. It's like, I don't know. I never asked. I still don't know. I don't care. It's just not an appropriate question. Yeah. But that's like a trope that people use in, you know, telling the story of trans people. So to your point, we did our best to build trust, to really listen, and not create kind of an exploitative relationship, which is something that has happened. You know, even Paris is Burning, which is one of my favorite films. I love that film, but if you actually look into the story of how that film was made, there's like a lot of bad feelings, and there's issues around representation and exploitation, which I actually researched as part of this project. Like, how do you engage in a community? Like, I'm a queer person, so I have a connection, but I'm of a different generation, and I'm like cisgendered, and I'm, you know, so how do you engage with people in a way that is not repeating that cycle of exploitation, I guess.
Yeah.
And to do it in a way that is honest, and yeah, I mean, this is reductive, but it's like really about listening and trying not imposing your point of view, which some people would disagree with. Like, that's what filmmaking is, but really I'm like trying to, like, you know, capture the essence of this person and put it on the screen, without too much filtering through my, you know, my biases.
Yeah. Well, I think you did it, but I'm not Olive. But one of the ways though that we get to know, I mean, there are, you give us a lot of different ways to get to know Olive. We get to see archival footage. We talk to people who have known her for a long time. We see her in her gorgeous home. An aside, what was your favorite thing or item or work of art in Olive's home?
Oh, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
Like, she has so much. I mean, she has a really amazing art collection. Artists that have given her, you know, there's a few cutaways in the documentary, like a Joe Average piece that I love. That's like a painting of Olive.
With pasties. Yes.
With pasties. It's like such a great piece. Yeah, it's hard to say. There's just like so many cool knickknacks, and yeah, it's really cool.
And it's all her.
Yeah.
It's all her. Yeah, very cool. You know, so yeah, so we get to see her in her home, but we also kind of get to know her through, you know, the newer generation of performers, two of which are, you know, Made in China and Chanel. I'd love to hear your comments on you know, how these performers are different from Olive, and also how they are, you know, heirs to her legacy. You know, I think it was Chanel who called her the you know, the grande dame of the neighborhood, right? You know, they're very cognizant of the fact, you know, that she is an elder. Yeah. So how are they different, and how are they heirs?
Yeah, I mean, part of the film, I mean, the reason why we did this intergenerational, the relationship between Olive and like a younger trans woman or drag performer is because she actually maintains those relationships. Like, that wasn't like we were forcing it. Olive hangs out with, you know, a lot of young people and a lot of young performers. They know of her, they look up to her. She is an icon in the community.
Yeah.
People admire her for many reasons. You know, some of it like her style, her fashion, but you know, and her, you know, she participates in things as well. But yeah, like, you know, Chanel is her friend. They're good friends. and Made in China is someone in the community, they know each other, and Olive would go to Made in China's performances.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think it's just showing how they're inheriting, you know, basically Olive is paving the way for this next generation. So like there's a great line in the film, it's a bit of a spoiler, but Made in China, you know, comes out to her dad as trans, and her dad's like, is that all you have to tell me? Like, it's no big deal. Not because he didn't care, but because it's like, that's fine, I love you, it's fine. But like that type of response from a parent coming out as trans is like, just, you know, that's fairly recent. There might have been exceptions, but like this is, you know, we're only kind of getting into that place where it's understood and accepted. And it's people like Olive that paved the way, that created the space for this next generation to have that privilege. But also it should be a right to do that. So it was really important to show that relationship between, you know, the next generation and Olive. I should mention Chanel is not like she's not really a performer, although I say when she goes out on Friday nights and gets dressed up, that is kind of like a, you know, performative art, I would say. But yeah.
That's what I thought, that, you know, because she was part of the entourage, right? So
yeah.
I thought it was like the living art of just, you know, being on the street, taking up space.
Yes. So that in that way, yes, that she is an artist. So
yeah. Okay. Right. Well, thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah.
What would you like people who live on this land but are not part of the queer community to know about the history of the queer community in Vancouver? You know, because I mean, you show highlights, lowlights in the film, which I think would be a surprise to a lot of people, you know, who just only know like one level of history, you know, maybe not before. Like, what do you think are some things that it's, you know, important for people to know?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important to know your local history, you know, and I feel like that kind of locality is disappearing because of social media. At the risk of sounding like an old person, I just think like people are very tuned in to what's happening in the States, for example, with Black Lives Matter, which is great, and I you know, I support that, of course. But it's also important to understand how these social movements and the things that are happening in your own community, which isn't necessarily the same as everywhere else. So, you know, I think as a point of pride, Vancouver had the first official Pride Parade in Canada, meaning the city proclaimed Gay Unity Week and supported the event. That, you know, most Vancouverites don't know that, but that's part of this long history of Vancouver as a progressive city.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's an important thing, is to know your local history, for sure.
Yeah. And as somebody who has written for 2 local papers that both closed during, you know, the West Ender and the Vancouver Courier newspaper, you know, there are, you know, community outlets, you know, that are closing all over the place. Like, I would see that their importance and added importance, you know, in documentary, you know, and in what, you know, TELUS Originals is doing by sharing these stories, you know, in this kind of way.
Yeah.
You mentioned at the top of our chat that you would love to talk a little bit more about TELUS Originals, you know, and what they did for you, or actually, I'm not sure what you were going to say. Why don't you just tell us?
Yeah, no, I mean, first of all, we were lucky to work with Christina at TELUS as the producer. So, I mean, she was so helpful all along the way, giving feedback on the film. but also just allowing us to tell the story the way we wanted to tell it, which is a really big deal. And in fact, I'm just starting to work on a project with Veronica and Chanel, who are in the Empress. They want to do this really amazing project, and they approached me, and I was like, I kind of don't want to go through a funder. I want to let's find a way to produce this on our own, because it's not going to be like it was with TELUS Originals, where we were given a lot of creative freedom. And I just feel like that's so important. It's just really important. So that I really appreciated that part of working with TELUS Originals.
Creative freedom. I guess that also, through the whole process, then you have that opportunity to just, to breathe, to sit in stuff, to make mistakes, and that must be
that opportunity to, it's amazing. And I don't think it's typical, especially as first time directing a feature film, to be given that amount of freedom. And, and we also were making a necessarily typical documentary, as you described it, as gender or genre bending. It's there's drag performances, it's a historical doc, it's it's kind of defies description in some way. And it was
I tried, and you're right. It defies description because historical, present, future, musical performances, archival stuff. It just was I was like, I have to write something now. I couldn't describe it.
Well, you did a good job.
Thank you.
It was so challenging to, but we were afforded the freedom to take those risks. And I'm super thankful for that. But now it's kind of set me up where I'm like, oh no, I can't work on projects unless it's like that.
I think it's good to, to start at that level and being like, this is what I want from all things. And then, just, it's challenging, but, so the film though, however you kind of measure it, it's been and is successful. As I read off at the top, you've screened at numerous festivals, but you have had a screening right here in Vancouver, correct? And I would assume, making an assumption here, that particular screening would be important, for you personally and for the people involved in the film. Tell me about what that screening was like for you, and what was some of the feedback you received, that you cherish the most.
Yeah, so it had screened in Vancouver. It screened at Van City. It actually had a run at the theater for a week, and it did quite well. And then we had another event at UBC Square. They brought in students from around the province. That was really great. But I think the one you're referring to is the Vancouver Queer Film Festival. It was
always a good time, I gotta say. It is. Don't tell all the other film festivals, but it's my favorite film festival.
I agree. It's fantastic.
So tell us about that one.
Yeah, so they gave us the opening gala spot in the festival, and they put on a party, and it sold out, and there was a huge crowd and people dressed up. And to me, it was the most meaningful of all the screenings, and it was amazing. At the end of the film, there was a standing ovation that lasted it was almost like there was two standing ovations.
Wow.
And of course for Olive, not just the film, but it was incredible. It was the whole audience got everything about the film, every moment, because it was relevant, and it related to people in the film, and there were a lot of people with connections to the story that showed up, including Billie Jean's partner, was really meaningful. It was, I mean, it was spectacular. It was incredible. It was like by far, it's like, you know, it's a life moment. Like I'll never forget it.
Yeah. Now, as you've taken, though, have you traveled with the film, though, as it screens, so, if I remember correctly, I'm scrolling back up to the top here. So you screened in London.
Yeah.
And where's Lunenburg Doc Fest?
Lunenburg is in Nova Scotia.
Okay.
It was like, I know, I thought it was in Europe.
Okay,
like,
good. It's not just me.
It's like, I get to go to Europe. It's like, no, but actually what a beautiful place. That was interesting because I flew in a day early to that festival. Fantastic festival, really great films. And then a hurricane hit. So none of the other filmmakers showed up. So it was me and like this, a couple other really fantastic filmmakers who got like all the attention. And no, it was amazing. Yeah, but they weren't even sure if the screening was going to happen because there was no power for a period of time.
Wow.
Then we had a screening in Courtenay. It was like a fundraising event.
Yeah.
And protesters showed up, which was insane. I have like this really great picture of Chanel and Veronica all dressed up, like posing in front of all these people with their like signs and stuff.
Wow.
That's
painful, but like it's shocking, and yet it's also, I guess, not at all. Your film is like, you were talking about, Made in China's dad, but as like, it's almost like, as there's more, even my daughter, being 13 years old in high school, like, they have the language, to talk about, gender identity, and they have friends who are, who are all the entire, spectrum of genders and sexuality. So as there's more freedom, there's also, more of these like elements that are like pushing back, against it. It's like your film is like coming out at this time. That's another kind of key time in history, right?
I know, it's really fascinating because when we started the film, of course, there's always transphobia and it was there in the background, but it's now become like a key political, discussion, flashpoint. And could not have predicted that, the subject matter in the film would become so relevant to this moment. Unfortunately, like, it's really upsetting, but like you said, it's kind of a product of success, because there has been so much progress that there is also this pushback. And hopefully, we just get through this period, this backlash, and eventually overcome it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, so I was going to say, like, though, like it also makes me kind of feel like a film like yours is also really important because it's, it's another opportunity, to see, people who are, living, in this community and, how they contribute and what they can do, right? Like it's representation. I mean, we talk a lot in the film and TV industry about representation, in the narrative space, but in the documentary space, these stories, representation of these stories is important as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, I mean, we have talked about the fact that this was, what a film for your documentary feature directorial debut. How did the Empress of Vancouver and the Empress of Vancouver, so I'm talking about film and person, how did they change you as a filmmaker, and also as a human being?
Yeah, as a filmmaker, it was an opportunity to finally explore feature-length filmmaking, and also explore subject matter that I'm personally interested in and care about. So I feel like forever grateful. It only took like, I don't know, when did I graduate from university? It took like decades. It's really challenging to be an artist and a filmmaker, in general. So yeah, I mean, I feel like after making that film, you know, with a somewhat limited budget, during a pandemic, with, you know, challenging subject matter, like, if we can pull that off, then I'm sure I can make another film again. You know, like, so it was,
And not in a few decades, like
no,
in the next few years.
sooner than later. Yeah. And then how did it change me as a person? I think it just goes back to what I was saying about, I feel like what Olive has to contribute is that she pushes against these like norms, and we have to be very careful, you know, to create space for difference. And you know, especially now, like even around discussions around gender identity or whatever, I feel like because it's so politicized and because people are fighting for their lives, it makes sense. But there's also this kind of compartmentalization. And we just have to, well, Leave reminds us that we have to create space for, you know, infinite numbers of expressions of being. You know, it's not, and really, like, it's that homonormative thing, like the way to gain acceptance, if that's your goal. You know, I don't think that's even Olive's goal, but let's say as a political movement, it's not about proving how normal you are. That is like, you can't compromise the diversity in your community, in yourself, just to gain acceptance from, you know, the majority. So that to me is like I said, I'll carry that with me forever in every project I work on. Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay. So what else? I mean, you mentioned that you're working on a project with Chanel and Veronica. What kind of work would you like to be making moving forward?
Yeah, so that project, which I'm so excited about, so it actually came out of that trip to Courtenay, where there were people protesting, but there were also all these young people in the audience that were so appreciative that we had come to town, that we showed the film, and they, you know, Chanel and Veronica did the Q&A at that event, and they were amazing, and people were like cheering and clapping. And afterwards, we went to a bar, and this teacher came up to us who had been in the audience and said, you know, this is like so important what you're doing, and like, you know, the situation for trans people in small communities especially is just getting worse because it's being so politicized. So after that, you know, we were joking we were famous in Courtenay because all these people were coming up to us. But after that, on the drive back, they're like, imagine we traveled across Canada and visited trans people in smaller communities. We'd call it Trans Canada. Travel along the Trans Canada Highway and visit people living outside the big cities, often living without any support at all, and turn it into a web series, that's what we're doing. So
I can't wait. I can't wait. I have a lot of concerns about the people that you encounter along the way, you know, especially in this highly charged time, but I can't wait to watch this as well.
Oh yeah, like safety is like huge.
Yeah. In that audience though, in Courtenay, you know, and you say that people were asking questions, young people asking questions, what kind of questions were they asking? What did they want to know, you know, from Chanel and Veronica?
I think, well, one big thing was how to deal with basically bullying in the schools. And, you know, I'm not going to put words in Chanel and Veronica's voice, but in their, you know, I feel like their message was not compromising who you are. Finding your tribe was like another theme that was, you know, they shared. Like, you need to find other people that support who you are, even if it's just one or two people in your smaller community. Yeah, I think, and one question that meant a lot to me was a parent talking about their kid who's trans, from what I remember, and just about, your role as a parent. Do you try and help them fit in so they can avoid being bullied? Or do you, obviously you embrace and accept who they are? And I said I have an 8-year-old kid, and like this question is something I've thought about, because, he has long hair, and even people have made issues about that. And, ultimately it goes back to, and I sound like a broken record, but it's not about teaching your child to sacrifice parts of who they are or to fit in. That's not the lesson here. The lesson here is you need to know who you are. I need to see who you are. I need to support exactly the person that you are and create safe spaces for you. And yeah, I think that's ultimately the lesson of the film.
Beautiful. And I'm happy to hear that that parent was even at that screening, watching it and then asking questions. We're coming to the end of our time together today, Dave. So for our final question then, how would you like people to feel, or what kind of conversations would you like to inspire with, with your film when the credits are rolling on the Empress of Vancouver? So they're sitting in the theater, they're sitting at home, and credits are rolling. What would you like them to be feeling? What questions would you like them to ask? What conversations would you like to overhear in the lobby?
Yeah. I think it's a good question, because it's not like there's some call to action at the end, but I think it's about, seeing people's humanity, learning that you can access history through different people's lenses, like, gay and lesbian history is not necessarily the same as like trans history in Vancouver. So I think it's more like trying to challenge people to see the world through other people's eyes. Yeah, and also just like how hard people have fought to get where we are. And also like the risk of, I think people take for granted that all these rights are like enshrined in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, or, in the Constitution or whatever. But, there is a real risk of losing your rights. Even before Hitler came into Germany, there were like tons of gay bars. There was like a sexual research center. It was like very open, very tolerant in Berlin. And look what happened. Like, I'm not fear mongering, but I'm just saying we have to appreciate where we've come from, how hard it was to get here, and make sure that we don't go backwards.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much,
Sabrina, for this conversation.
Yeah, it was good to meet you.
Good to meet you as well. And thank you for listening to and watching the TELUS Originals Doc Talks, and to our guest, Dave Rodden-Shortt. Watch TELUS Originals documentaries at TELUS Optik TV Channel 8 and watch.telusoriginals.com, and follow us at TELUS Originals on Instagram. Doc Talks are a production of TELUS Originals. This episode was produced by Sharon Bradley with technical support by Matt Waterworth. Ken Soy is the production executive for TELUS Originals Doc Talks. Doc Talks are produced on the traditional and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations.